Bienvenidos a Disrupt Everything, podcast series by Isra García. Reinvéntate a ti mismo y cambia lo que más te importa.
The aim to create more of a sense of home for people in themselves and in the world. This is a quote that I extracted from our next guest. And you guess it, as I'm talking in English, it means that today we have an international guest here in the weekly Reinvention podcast, Disrupt Everything podcast series, where we deconstruct and dissect worldwide disruptors and high performers, high achievers, and people who is somehow in different ways changing the game, disrupting the status quo and creating a new one. And today we have a really interesting guest. Today we're going to start with disruption. Today is always the day, as I say when I wake up. And when it's always the day, it means the question that I always been asked by my Zen master: what is this? And this is now. This is here. This is this. And that's what I want to bring today to you. You're listening to this podcast. What is this? What is this thing I'm seeing? What is this thing called I? What is this change I'm trying to make? What is this resistance? What is this fear? What is this? Because the question becomes the answer. And this is the beginning of a revolution which destroys perfect and creates impossible. So our next guest, I think, has a lot to say about it, about disruption, about revolution, about creating ecosystems, about reinventing, redesigning. Today, here in Disrupt Everything podcast series, we have Ian Michael Hébert. I hope I say it correctly. Ian, welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to offer whatever I can to your listeners today. I'm excited to be calling in to you from Costa Rica, from the heart of the Diamante Valley, the diamond in the center of the lotus that is Costa Rica.
Beautiful. So let's jump to the intro and let's take action.
Disrupt everything. Explora los márgenes o muere intentándolo.
Who is Ian Michael? He is co-founder at Holos, an organization building holistic healing centers and communities, launching first of a kind in Costa Rica. He was born in Alaska, and he's the former director of project at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and he holds a master in counseling psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and a degree in eco-resort design and development. He's deeply committed to conscious development practices. Ian Michael holds also a master's from California Institute, as I said before. He completed also a bachelor degree, as we said, in eco-resort design. He has facilitated expansion of multitude of spaces, and he is creator, he is leader, and he is guide. Board member of Canadian Psychedelic Association, as said, Chief Executive Officer at Holos Global, also combining his work and studies in eco-resort design and development with counseling psychology and community mental health. He has designed an steward place like Esalen Institute, Kinkana in Costa Rica, Jayen, Thailand, China Hot Springs in interior Alaska, and Ions in California. As a leader, Ian has appeared in a multitude of publications and podcasts, such as Plant Medicine podcast, Go Hack, Maya Psychedelic Therapy podcast, which is a friend in common, David Champion, I guess. Boldly now, also, he has engaged in talks and conferences and events such as Pioneers, Activate Puerto Rico, the Assemblage Nomad, Burning Man, Esalen Institute, and Envision Festival, to name a few. And as a guide, and for the last 18 years, he has been guiding. For the last 18 years, he has been guiding individuals and groups through transformational processes, all with the aim of deepening presence, authenticity, and connection. There are an array of modalities that he has used and uses to catalyze and awaken consciousness and purpose, which we discuss in this podcast. Much of his current facilitating work takes place through Holos, the organization we mentioned before, where they offer retreats publicly and privately for those seeking deep and lasting well-being. Definitely, Ian follows a life devoted to creating inspiring spaces for the transformation of individuals, organizations, and society. Through the various projects and initiatives he has involved in, consistently demonstrating the capacity to take initiative from vision through manifestation, from zero to hero. That's Ian Michael Hébert. Ian, thank you now in a more formal way, in a more complete way, for devoting your time to sharing your knowledge, and also thank you for the work you've done for the world up until now.
Thank you so much. I think that was probably the best introduction I've ever heard of my life and my work. So that's humbling. Thank you.
I'm blessed that is that way. I wanna, after that hectic and also eclectic curriculum and all the projects you've done up until now, the first question that comes to my mind is, if you were to put your life in a timeline, which is a timeline, it makes sense, and if you were to name the most profound, the most important highlights and most profound takeaways of this timeline, what would be that milestones?
It's such a good question. My mind immediately went to moments that I've been in nature, and the sense of ego, the sense of individuated self has dissolved. And those moments have become these gems along the path. And when you first said like most important moment or most important moments, I went back to being underneath a waterfall when I was 18 years old in central Mexico, in the state of Jalisco, near Puerto Vallarta. And a friend of mine that I had met along the path, he was on a similar meditation journey to myself, an Eastern path that is focused on an inner sound and inner light. I was in a path similar to that lineage, and so he and I met, and we had a very deep instant connection, and he encouraged me to go up into the mountains. I went to this small village, Yalapa, and at that point they had no power, they have no roads, you have to take a boat to get there. And so I ventured into the jungle and up into the waterfalls as deep as I could go, and I found this one particular waterfall that I went behind the waterfall and I started singing. It was like a little pocket of air behind the waterfall, just big enough for a person. And I started singing. I started toning this sound hue, and I was able to adjust the tone so that it was reflecting off of the water in this perfect way that created like a harmonic chamber. There's something called constructive waves, where when a sound wave or a wave builds on itself, and it created this resonant chamber that completely dissolved my sense of body and mind. And the sun was in front of the water, and I could just feel this perfect alchemy of the rock behind me, and the water in front of me and the sun. And it created this chamber of light that dissolved my body into all that I can describe it as like a unitive state of consciousness place where I was at one with the sun and the water and the droplets and the light and the sound and the rock. And for some reason, when you asked, that stood out as a really poignant moment. I've had many other poignant moments in life that have informed my path, a lot of them with plant medicine. And then also the next moment that came to mind as you asked that was this period of time that I was living at Esalen Institute, which is one of the kind of founding retreat centers in the movement of the human potential movement, and also a lot of transpersonal psychology and Gestalt therapy and movement practices came out of this place, Esalen. And one of the reasons that I think Esalen is this perfect birthing ground for spirit and for these different practices is the power of that landscape. The power of Big Sur is really unparalleled. And so when I was living there, I was directing a large redevelopment and redesign of the campus, and I had such a deep dialogue with the elements there, with the power of the mountains and the ocean and the hot springs and the creek and the fire within people. And I to create spaces for transformation, and that was really a highlight of my journey. But I feel like so many of the highlights that, like I just described in my journey, have been some form of dialogue and learning from the elemental world around me. And so that's part of what has directed my path here to Costa Rica. And just a short vignette. When I was 17 years old, I became a vegetarian and had a lot of psychedelic experiences and felt complete with those. And so I was focusing my path on meditation, but I had this deep desire to live in a way that was in harmony with my world around me. And living in Alaska, the diet is there's a lot of hunting and a lot of focus on that. And so I felt this call to Costa Rica and to Belize and to come to Central America to look for a place where I could live a lifestyle that felt more in harmony with my surroundings. So I hitchhiked from Alaska down to Mexico, and that's as far as I got on that trip.
Wow.
And then had that experience in the waterfalls and felt really complete. So it's taken a full 20 years to eventually realize this dream and to be centered here in Costa Rica. But all of these different life events have built on each other to this moment.
We are connected through since the first action to the last one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What have you found after you've been guiding groups and individuals last 18 years? That's a quite interesting amount of time. So what have you found after guiding those individuals and groups through transformational processes in the last 18 years? What would be your key points or your findings?
Yeah, I think that it first starts with trust and giving people an atmosphere and a space and a holding environment, whether that's psychological or physical, giving them a sense of safety. Once you have the sense of someone being held and being able to trust, then their surrender is in proportion. It's related to the amount of trust and safety people feel. So, I think step one is creating that environment. And the world is ripe and people's consciousness is ripe right now for transformation, and there's a deep desire. And so it's also a deep responsibility because people's attention is going outward, seeking throughout the world for practices and people that can help guide them back to their own innate wholeness. And so as any practitioner or guide, it's a deep responsibility to hold people in that space. It's very much like being a parent, and when someone is going through a very deep process, it's like they have this opportunity for rebirth, for the death of an old self and the emergence of a new self. And so our responsibility is such that we can hold it in that way, that it's like a young plant or a young child. It's like it needs that environment of safety and trust in order to grow into a new way of being. So that's what I've been really honing in on and refining. What is it to create that atmosphere of safety? But then also at the same time, you want to have enough of an element of the unknown and of what is possible. So if the environment is just safe, it isn't evocative of people's desire for change. And so we try to strike that balance. And it's one of the reasons that I'm drawn to very wild places like Costa Rica or Big Sur, or growing up in Alaska. I also want people to have an encounter with the realness of life itself, and to recognize that nature is both ultimately supporting and nurturing and also fierce, so that we have that opportunity to dance and to feel both the presence of life and death.
Well, really interesting. Ian, so what are the key elements to create that environment of security and trust? And that's, I think, is an important question to ponder today, as everyone is trying to jump on the psychedelic or let's call it peak experience spaces, retreats. I think create that environment is a critical point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a great book called The Book of Tea, and I read it in my late teens, and it's about the Japanese tea ceremony. And they describe the way that the ceremony is not just the pouring of the tea. The ceremony is the way that the tea is grown, the way that the tea is harvested, the way that the pots are made, where the clay comes from, the way that they choose the wood for the tea house. And all of these elements are brought into creation through what could be called now a practice of mindfulness, but it's really just being conscious of every step. And so, in preparing people for a peak experience, what we're really aiming for is that people not just have this momentary peak experience of revelation and then go back to their normal default, way of being. And so the preparation is in service to the whole arc. It's in service to people being ready. It's in service to having the space prepared, and then it's in service to where they land afterwards, and the way that they can integrate, what we call integrate, into their daily lives. And so some of the considerations for me are physical, because I was the son of a home builder and have been, in the world of development and design. So a piece of it is physical, having the right, environment that holds people and has them feel comfortable. And then even more importantly is the connection between two people, or between a person and a group, and tending to that relational field in a way that people feel like they're in a womb, or like they're held by tribe. Because when we have that sense of a circle holding us, or an environment holding us psychologically, then the possibility of releasing our shadow aspects, or exploring parts of ourselves that are really vulnerable, is heightened. Our ability to feel safe, like I said, is in proportion to our ability to tap into those places that don't feel safe.
So what are the most, so once you create this safe environment, one of the awakening consciousness and catalyzing also, what are the most impactful tools you use for catalyzing and awakening consciousness? or awaking,
Yeah.
awaking consciousness and purpose?
Yeah. One is definitely nature. So like very direct experiences that put us in touch with both the immense power of life itself, as well as the possibility of our own mortality. So that's kind of number one. And then as far as very specific modalities, we work with breath work, we work with psychedelic medicines, and a lot of group work, like a lot of awareness building and how we're seen and how we express ourselves. Like once we have a group field that is familiar to someone, or where they feel they can start to take risks, then there's a lot of magic that you can create in there. I've had group processes where we very much move into transpersonal states, very much move into psychedelic spaces without any medicine, just through the power of consciousness. And so I have this kind of ongoing hypothesis that everything is conscious. And when we are confronted with that reality, then we start to have that introspection and we start to have that attunement with the overall field around us. So anything that builds a greater degree of awareness and sense of consciousness within ourselves and within the world around us is like a thread of technique that we use at Holos, or that I use in my work.
Also, can you also share some of one or two best practices that has proven most effective in the field for you while doing this groundwork?
Yeah, certainly, like having the personal relationships, having people feel a sense of being seen and having a sense of belonging. That's really a first step. And then, like I said, the integration piece. So just having an opportunity where people have their voice heard, where they have an opportunity to be witnessed. And then there's, of course, a lot of different ways that you can ground those experiences that you've had, whether it's through art or journaling. It's very basic human things like movement and yoga and eating well. And it's like there's a way that we have these peak experiences, and then the ideal is that we realize the sacred in the mundane, that we start to have regular practices in our lives that reconnect us to that sense of wonderment and awe in our lives every day. And so, yeah, we try to build those practices into the retreats that we run in a week-long format or in a longer term format. And it's just about building a practice. It's about building a practice of being more aware.
Do you agree that the mundane and sacred can coexist in the same space in a daily basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if there's a goal, that would be the goal, is to realize every act is sacred.
How can we be conscious about it, and so that process, so that helps to this process to take place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the centers in the body is the heart, and a lot of people talk about the heart. And I find that the more that we attune and get to know our heart center as like an actual place of consciousness, as a tool of awareness, that our ability to center in the heart in our awareness is a way of giving more care to every moment. And then we can become very nuanced in understanding through breath and through awareness that every movement has effects. For every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's a very like basic physics principle, but there's so often that we become asleep to the impacts of our actions. And so having that practice of every footstep becoming a prayer, it's like it takes a lot of, it's like working a muscle. It takes a lot of practice to get into that state, but the fruit of that practice is a very fulfilled, very present life, because whatever you're attending to in that moment becomes ritual, becomes an opportunity for communion with for lack of a better word, the divine, or lack of communion with the rest of the universe.
That's so interesting. But how about psilocybin, which is also we were talking about before in the behind the curtains. We were talking about psilocybin, about some of the projects you are leading with indigenous people. Psilocybin in 2021 and in 2022. What's in for us? Where are we heading? What's the work you were leading in that field?
Yeah, psilocybin is a really beautiful and profound medicine, and one of the things that I appreciate about that particular medicine is that it's all over the world. There's all different strains of psilocybin all over the world, and so there have been specific traditions like the Mazatec in Mexico that have had a more clear and disciplined practice and lineage, but then there's so many other lineages that are lesser known. And so, to my delight and surprise, I found out a little over a year ago that there's a practice of working with psilocybin here in Costa Rica. So we had just started running Holos retreats and had started to plan a retreat here in Costa Rica. And so I got in touch with friends that knew the local indigenous tribes better than I did, and I was introduced to this woman who was an apprentice to a Bribri elder. So there's many tribes in Costa Rica, but there's just a few that still have their language, and language often carries much of the lineage and the storytelling, because many of the traditions of the world were oral traditions. So the Bribri are a tribe that still hold their oral traditions. And so we invited this elder from the Talamanca tribe of the Bribri to come out and to perform a psilocybin ceremony here. And it was one of the more powerful and profound events of my life, because I've always had these prayers of integrating with the people that have stewarded a land for many generations and millennia. It's like when you go into, or when you knock at a new house, when you go to somebody's house, and maybe you're invited to their house, but you still would knock and you still would greet the host. And so similarly in Costa Rica, I grew up in Alaska, so this is not my homeland, and it's my responsibility to know whose house I'm in. So it felt very powerful and fulfilling to have this elder abuelo come to the land and to bless the land and to bless our ceremony and to share their cosmology of the world. And we invited him and his partner and his apprentices out. We had this beautiful ceremony. His partner had never been in a car before, had never really fully left the village, and didn't even speak Spanish. She was speaking primarily the Bribri dialect. And so I was watching her nervous system and the ways that she was trying to understand and make sense of a world that was very foreign to her. And so that built another level of sensitivity in me to how I interact with people of different cultures, and with a lot of humility and a lot of curiosity, and going at the pace that they work at. We're looking at psilocybin in the world right now in a way that there's companies that are very reductive, where it's, they break it down to a single molecule and extract that or synthesize that and then work with that in a very clinical setting. And then there's people in the world like the Bribri or the Mazatec who are still very much in a place of a tradition that is rooted in the earth and rooted in direct communion with these hongos, with the mushrooms. So it was so beautiful to have him out. And then we invited our caretaker, Domingo, who's been on this land for 18 years. We invited him to the ceremony, and there's this very interesting balance of animism and Catholicism here in Costa Rica, where the people of our neighborhood, they go to church, but then they also have like a deep communion with the spirits of the land. And so Domingo came to our ceremony and was deeply blessed by the elder, and as one of the great stewards of this property where we're building this village. And so Domingo and I, even though my Spanish is rudimentary and basic, we still have this beautiful dialogue. Last night we had to take care of a deadly snake next to someone's cabin, and so we talked about what is the right way to be in relationship with this snake and to say the right prayers. And so we're still in this dialogue. But after that ceremony that we had with the Bribri elder, Domingo started to collect the psilocybin from the cow patties here on the property. And so a large part of the story that we're wanting to share of Holos is that recognition that we're all part of a whole, and that when we work with these psychedelic medicines, it's in relationship to traditions that have been holding this medicine for thousands of years, and also in relationship to everything that's around us. So that was a beautiful ceremony where we could celebrate that.
So where do you think we are heading now in psilocybin, and how do you plan to add some value in this world that is going through also massive commercial usage of psilocybin in the next year? A lot of, more than $6 billion invested in psychedelics this year. More than 100 million people will try psychedelics this year. What do you think we need to take into account, or what would be, essential steps to take care?
Yeah, just remembering that these are very powerful allies, and so there's going to be different threads of how this moves into the world. Some of it is already recreational, some of it is very clinical, and then remembering that we stand on the shoulders of cultures that have held this in a ceremonial way for a very long time. And so, what I see in the larger industry is a very reductive approach, and many people and companies that have very little experience, as well as very little reverence for where these medicines originally come from. And so, I have like a degree of concern in that regard, because these are medicines that can take you to many different places in the psyche. And I look at the psyche in terms of a membrane, like a cell has a membrane, or our earth has an atmosphere that holds the sanctity of life here and protects us from the sun and from, the cold and darkness of space. And similarly, the psyche, each human being I see as having a membrane. And if we experience something that is so far outside that membrane that we don't know how to integrate it, either we forget that it even happened, or it can create a rupture in that membrane. And it's like when we used to have a hole in the ozone, it's dangerous for the health of that organism. So I think that there's a lot of people and companies moving into this space that don't have a basic understanding of what a healthy human being is and what they're working with, like the power of these medicines. So, but I also see a lot of really sincere hearts, and the work that we're doing with the Canadian Psychedelic Association and other organizations is to bridge that divide between those that are very excited about this and pouring a lot of money into the industry, and then those that have a very grounded knowledge and capacity for space holding. So, we're at Holos really trying to strike that balance and to find that place between the clinical and the ceremonial approaches, having the grounding of Western medicine and understanding the psyche in that particular lens, and then also having a deep reverence and incorporation of the ceremonial and the more indigenous knowledge of how to work with these substances. So psilocybin is a very interesting one because it carries less stigma than other medicines like ayahuasca, iboga, San Pedro, peyote. They each have their own cultural context and that needs to be respected. With psilocybin, there seems to be such a global expansion of it and multiple countries that are very open to it and where it's legal to an extent. So it's moving very quickly. And yeah, and so I think that there's just like a lack of eldership in the space, and there are people rising into those places, and there are elder voices that are coming to the forefront. And then I also see that there's a lot of immaturity in the approach, even if people have the best of intentions and are doing this in a way of like a pharmaceutical approach. This is not business as usual. This is a revolution in mental health and spiritual health that could take place on our planet if it's held in a responsible way.
Amen. What are your best findings about seeking deep and lasting well-being?
Well, I really have been appreciating the work of Stan Groth, who's definitely one of my mentors and the inspiration behind Holos. And he has a body of psychological inquiry that is based off of decades of experience. And there's a system of understanding early life trauma called the perinatal matrices. And the perinatal matrices are the birth process that we all go through. And there's imprints that get hardwired into our nervous system based on that very powerful event of being born, whether it's through being born through a C-section or having a vaginal birth. You have your system is tested, your organism is tested through that initial impression of coming into the world and being an individuated being. And more in my work, I'm seeing people regress or return back into those original traumas. And then I continue to see the way that orientation to the world around them is hardwired into their system and patterns the way that they relate to the world, and then often attracts different types of experience of being self and in relationship to the outer world. And so the reason I bring that up when you talk about lasting change or transformation is if we can go back to some of those core imprints, it's like having a computer operating system, or if you have an organism growing and then it, like a tree, and the top gets cut off and then it has to find a new way. It's like, how do we rewire those original imprints influence the way that we are moving through the world? If we can address those core imprints and wiring and patterning, then we have an opportunity for a new way of being that's very natural. And even further back, like you can go to the perinatal matrices and birth, and then you can go back further into our genetics or into ancestral wounds. And a lot of my work has also, for myself, been resolving things that have happened in my lineage that may go back one generation, two generations, my grandfather's suicide or my father's loss of his mother at a younger age, and get to look at those and see the way that those transition and transferred into my being, even before birth and throughout my life. And then going even further back, looking at how has humanity moved across the globe, and how have the choices of my ancestors influenced the way that I see the world now. So going back and deconstructing all the way through that. And then even further back, you move into more transpersonal phenomena of how have the genetics of the human species been mapped, and how has the psyche grown through very particular conditions and challenges. And when you can start to really hold and address those things within oneself, then there's an opportunity to choose a different way of viewing the world and being. And so that's really the approach that I take. So partially it's chronological, but to another extent, it all exists, like you said, right here, right now, in our being, in the way that we're perceiving. So yeah, I'm very excited about those narratives and a lot of different things that are emerging in the collective consciousness through politics and social change. And there's so much that is emerging to the surface of these very ancient wounds that we're holding as a species and that we hold individually. And as those wounds come to the light, they have the opportunity for some relief and some clearing. You know, it's like if you have a wound that has a piece of material in there festering, until you remove that material, it will continue to fester. But as soon as you bring that material out of the body, you can look at it, then the healing can really begin.
So it's a way of reverse engineering and going back to the, as you say, the core imprints of your, not only your ancestral lineage, but also the humanity, right? The more you go to the start from the scratch, the clearer you have this long-lasting and deeper impact, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the, I mean, not to get too esoteric, but one of the experiences I had in a breathwork session was a deep inquiry into what is the nature of fear and where did this fear come from and why is it hardwired not just in ourselves, but in a lot of life itself. And whether this was my imagination or whether it was an actual journey into an event, I went back to, I felt Gaia, I felt the planet herself. And when there was something like an asteroid that hit the planet, and what that created in terms of a collective experience of unsafety and fear, and where there was like potentially a mass extinction. And I viscerally felt it as Gaia, what it was like to be impacted in that way and to have all of these species obliterated. So, you know, I don't know if that's a real imprint that is stored in our genetics and the genetics of a lot of the animals and life on Earth, but it's very possible. You know, these are postulations, but we don't know the origins of how we got here today. Not all of us know the stories of our ancestors, but we do know what we're working with at this moment in terms of how we're relating to the world. And we're starting to have examples, and we have examples from a lot of the mystical traditions of luminaries and people and beings that had another perspective that was more free, more liberated, more like what we're exploring with the psychedelic revolution, with wellness, with all of the different iterations of these great traditions finding a new voice in today's world.
Ayan, what have you, you say that one of the keys of your, also the trust, security is also physical, and you've been involved in sustainable living and creating spaces for this well-being. What are your key takeaways of the last 2 years working in creating a space in different parts of the world?
Yeah, my apologies if my reception is out a little bit at times. We have the rainy season beginning here, and so but I can just start from that. You know, it's like one of the key takeaways in terms of creating a safe space is really knowing where you are in relationship to the elemental forces around you. So, you know, I grew up in in such an incredibly beautiful and also at times incredibly desolate place. Um, Fairbanks, where I was born, we have like an hour and a half of sunlight, just a little bit of dawn and dusk in the middle of winter on winter solstice. And in the summer, we have 24 hours of sunlight in the middle of summer for like 2 months. And so I got the experience of having an environment that was at times so inviting, and we could be out as kids all night long playing. Perfect environment for a human. Plants are growing, there's food everywhere. And then having the extreme opposite where it's like 65 below zero Fahrenheit and there's no light, and all you have as your companion is your family and your friends, some animals that make it through the winter, and the aurora borealis and the moon. So, it's like that's not a very life affirming place, but it is life affirming in the sense that you get to find that within your own home and within your own self. And so you cultivate that sense of home. And now being in Costa Rica, the rhythms are so different. It's like our winter, like October through or November through May, is very sunny and beautiful, and an abundance of food. And then in the other season, there's on and off rain, and that's a part of what you have to get used to in the rhythm of very intense rains and navigating that, and what that does to a landscape, and then how it nourishes the plants. So there's the outer environment, there's the physical reality of the outer environment that we're in, and then there's the built environment. It's what humans create to have a sense of safety, ultimately, which is an illusion, but because we all are going to go through the threshold of death or leaving this body. But we like to build these structures around us that create a sense of security and safety and comfort and ease. And so we work with the elements as best we can. We pipe water into our houses. We heat with gas and fire. We warm ourselves how we need to. And it's those balance of elements into our homes that becomes our sense of safety, security, comfort. And so there's nothing wrong with being a human, vulnerable animal body, and our animal bodies like particular conditions. So we try to optimize for those conditions and create that comfort. So then people have the capacity to find the balance between a moment of comfort, having soft sheets or a beautiful bed, like something so simple, and then having the contrast of like a reality of the world around them that is less safe. And it's that contrast that actually reminds us of how blessed we are, and gives us appreciation for those moments where we can just totally release our nervous system. And one of the reasons that we chose this place of the Diamante Valley and Costa Rica, or it more chose us for the home of Holos, but the reason we chose it is partially because the conditions are so optimal for being a human. The land is so abundant, the soil is so fertile, there's so much fresh water and waterfalls. And what I find every day is that people come to this land and their bodies and their being have an opportunity to just rest. And then once that rest and nervous system decontraction has taken place, then there's the opportunity to look at deeper layers and to do the healing work there. And so that's why we're in this particular place. But the goal and everything that I've been doing in hospitality for the last 15 plus years is with the aim that this is an education, and that people get a sense of what it is to feel at home, and then they can take that and work with that anywhere in the world. And so we're also creating an online platform that we intend to be a living laboratory where we can see how people can connect with practices of yoga and breath and just eating healthy, and do that anywhere in the world. and create those conditions for themselves. So that's one of the big things. And then I think it's really worth noting the other significant component that I've seen time and time again as one of the biggest challenges is the social environment. So in intentional communities or retreat centers, there's factioning that happens. There's like a tribal impulse that we have to try to figure out what safety means in relationship to others in a group. And so there's ways to build into infrastructure opportunities for people to have the sense of autonomy and individuality, like their own space, and then opportunities for connection and communion. And when people aren't forced into one or the other, like isolation or connection, and have the agency of choice and have the opportunity for a sense of belonging, but also an opportunity for a sense of self, then that's the infrastructure design that we're really working on creating here, and that I want to become a replicable pattern that others can play with and work with.
Ayan, if you were about to start all over again, which lessons would you point as essential?
That's really an interesting question. There's so many times where I'm like getting the same message again and again of what I need to do for my own well-being and my own self-care. But if I was to start over again, it would be listening more to my elders, like from a very young age, and then probably being a little more studious. Like I can be a little bit austere in my approach to life, and there's so many traditions and things that we can learn from our elders and from our cultures and from our spiritual traditions. And one of the things I've seen here in Costa Rica very clearly is if I was to just be here with a few people and we were to start to learn about the plants and to live here on the land, it would take more than a lifetime to understand which plants were medicinal, which ones were edible, what really worked. But if you learn from your elders and pass that knowledge down, it aggregates. You build knowledge over time. And
yeah, it's
so this is one of the great tragedies of what's that?
No,
yeah, it's exponential.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so that's like it's one of the tragedies of this moment is there's languages and cultures that are being lost. Like in Alaska, we had family friends that were recording the languages of some of these tribes where there was only one or two people that still spoke it because the youth were so interested in MTV and moving to cities that they lost touch with the value of that oral tradition and of knowing the 100 names of snow. And so, yeah, I think if I was to go back, that would be one of the big lessons that I'm working with right now is trying to find the balance between attending to everything that needs attending, including the farm and creating the center and running retreats, and then really being in reverence and in study to everything around me, to the people that know this land and all the species here, to the traditions of different spiritual traditions that I adhere to. So yeah, that's I think a big lesson.
What other therapies and activations outside plant medicines we should know about that are not so common, and what are their most positive effects?
Yeah. Well, besides the ones that I've mentioned thus far, a framework that I deeply appreciate is called psychosynthesis. And that term was coined by a man, Alberto Assagioli, an Italian psychoanalyst that was a contemporary of Freud and Jung. And psychosynthesis, for some reason, not a lot of people are aware. It doesn't have that same level of popularity as psychoanalysis or Jungian psychology, but the psychosynthesis approach incorporates a lot of different modalities, but has a frame of the human being that I find very useful. And a lot of what psychosynthesis works with in its integration practices and in its exploration is guided imagery. And I've found that when you provide a palette, when you provide like a blank canvas for the psyche to fill its own material, it's a really powerful way for people to do inner exploration. So through guided imagery work where you're going on a journey, this was done by a lot of indigenous traditions too, where you're going on a vision quest inside your own being, and you have certain guideposts or certain ways that you have just enough suggestion of where you're going, and then your mind and your imagination fills in the rest. And it gives an opportunity for sense making, for your own mind to start to make sense of itself and of how it relates to the world. So psychosynthesis is definitely one of the traditions that I don't feel many people know about, that I've found to be a very powerful framework.
Thank you so much for sharing this one. Didn't know about it. Can you tell us about your most peculiar or insane psychedelic experience, and what you got from it?
Peculiar or insane. There's so many times where there's a threshold, like I talked about the membrane of the psyche, and when you go beyond it, there's no self, and that's the place that some people get lost and have a break. And so just maybe because of the extreme nature that I grew up in, or the extreme nature within me, I flirt with that edge where it's the disillusion of self into another field. And so there's a lot of moments that get very weird in that. And then I always return, I always return back to center. But I would say that 5-MeO DMT is probably the most powerful psychedelic molecule on Earth. And there's a way it directly puts one in touch with, or can put one in touch with, a unified field where there's no longer a sense of individuated self and consciousness becomes an ocean. And then all the strata of the psyche between our individual idea of ourself and that unitive state of consciousness can become illuminated. So those different layers where we're aware of both that unified field, but also our own humanness. And so there's been a lot of times where I've been traversing somewhere in that have gotten very real. Sometimes I turn into a lion. I've turned into an Ouroboros many times, like the snake that eats its own tail, and just cycled through life and death sequences for lifetime after lifetime. And so that gets a little bit weird or insane. But at this point, I've kind of seen so much within myself and holding space for others that not a whole lot surprises me.
I can imagine.
I had this great experience of holding space for someone. There was an elder holding the circle with ayahuasca, but I was there facilitating and holding the larger circle of the retreat. And I had a woman that really, she went very, very deep and wasn't conscious of her actions or where she was. And so we gently took her outside, and it took a long time to like tether her back into awareness of this plane. And what I was noticing in her body movements, and it was very kind of reptilian and very lost, and wasn't able to tell the difference between herself and whatever field that she was in. And then I just kind of like eventually was holding her for a while, and I recognized there was something in this, like I said earlier, that was relating to her birth experience. And I just kind of noted that it felt like, wow, she doesn't know the difference between self and other yet, which is like a state of being in the first perinatal matrice where you're in your mother's womb and you are directly connected to her emotions and the food she eats, and you are your mother. And so I asked her the next day, we were on a hike, and I said, I'm just curious, about that experience for you and what you remember. And then I'm also curious about your birth. And she shared very quickly. She was like, oh yeah, I had the cord wrapped around my neck when I was in my mom's womb, and I had to have a C-section. And it was just like the lights turned on because it was so evident. Like I could see her struggling with the cord again in this journey she was in. So
related, right?
Yeah. So I would say that was kind of a peculiar, but also very beautiful experience. Yeah.
Wow, thanks for sharing.
Mhm.
What's the hardest experience you've gone through as a professional?
The hardest experience I've gone through as a professional was leaving Esalen. Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah. Yeah. Leaving Esalen Institute in Big Sur. I had fallen so deeply in love with the community and the land and the tradition, and it was a very difficult individuation process. So I had helped rebuild the campus for 3.5 years. I was very well regarded by majority of the people, a lot of our donors, a lot of the practitioners, a lot of the staff, and I was moving into a place of long-term leadership there. And then due to my own immaturity and just not readiness for the level of leading Esalen, while I was very close, there was still much more work for me to do internally as a leader. And so, yeah, leaving Esalen was the most painful experience I've had professionally. And largely, I even like wept some tears the other day because I was sharing with a group about what we're creating here in Costa Rica with Holos and my commitment to this land. And it just struck this chord of the deep connection I still have with the Big Sur coast and with the land of Esalen and the sacred waters there and the indigenous people that were called the Esalen. All of those threads of relationships between the natural world, the indigenous people, the community, the traditions. It was like I was living inside of largely the utopian version of the world that I want to create and live inside. And so leaving that professionally and personally was one of the more painful events of my life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you in an impersonal level, but you included in the same response, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then the other piece that was present at that same time was my heart was really breaking. I had been in a relationship for a number of years, which also ended around the same time. And so I would say personally, the most difficult experiences in my life have always been relational. Yeah, I'm a lover. I have loved very deeply. I've been married twice. I have 2 amazing kids, and those moments of
Congratulations.
separation. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just went and saw my kids, and that's tough because they live in the States right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's harder to see them, but they know that Dad is building a home that they'll be able to come to, and that he's living his passion and dharma. And so, yeah, being apart from my kids is very difficult. But later this week, I'm going to give a Zoom talk to one of my kids' Waldorf schools, and I stay connected in a very real way. But it's still, there's nothing like the physical presence of your family or your beloved.
I hope you can get can get them soon to Costa Rica and enjoy with you in the amazing place you're building.
Yeah, thank you.
Ian, what's been your biggest success, and why do you think it happened?
Yeah, I think, well, my biggest success is probably my children. And that did not happen in a way that was planned. At least my first daughter. And yeah, there's a way that they're my greatest teachers. I've very much grown into a man through being a father, um, and part of the success of fatherhood is also really allowing children to be themselves and to have space to flower into their own psyche. And so I have these two amazing children. That was probably my greatest success. But professionally, um, when I was going to say Esalen and rebuilding the campus there, and I think that could be seen as a great success in an outer way. But I would say my greatest success otherwise is just being a loving presence for people while they're going through powerful, illuminating experiences of who they are. I really, truly love being a part of people's realization that they're already whole, that they're already complete. And so besides actually building physical things like a campus or a home for someone, actually tending and helping people tend to their own inner reality is probably what I would call my greatest success. Just being a good ally and a good friend to people.
And how about your most profound fail? Why happened it and what you learned from it?
Oh, my most profound fail, which I'm trying to repattern the way that I look at that, but is probably just myself,
Wow, so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to put it on anything outer, but any misstep, anything that happens in my life or that has been an outer manifestation of disharmony in myself, it all comes back to, have I been doing the work to refine my own being, and so there's so many times where I don't necessarily relate to it at this moment as a failure, but it's very much felt like a failure, that if I failed myself, then I fail so many people around me. And so, yeah, times that I've been in leadership positions where I just missed the mark, where I wasn't fully showing up at my best. Whether that's a failure or an opportunity for learning is kind of just the way that you frame it. But yeah, it always comes back to, am I living with as much love and attention and awareness as possible?
And in some sense you are, because that is what brings you that question. But you are doing the work and you are doing it with compassion. Sometimes it's hard to see it, right?
Yeah. And then I don't um, I don't know how to relate to this perfectly or how to describe it perfectly, but I've always felt since I was very young, what could be called the pain of the world, or sometimes the pain feels so big. It's not just me. It's like, I feel when an animal dies, or I feel the way that humanity is trying to work out its dance with the earth, and the way that we're doing that in a very destructive way that ends up in the death of species and of other people and of ecosystems. And so it's not all on me. This is something we all need to work towards, but I do feel like there's my own sense of failure that's connected to humanity's struggle right now, and that I always feel like I could be doing more, or there's ways that I could be shifting the world and, like you're saying, disrupt in a positive way the patterns that humanity is living inside of right now. So, that's very much like an ongoing mission that may never be completed. But there's this saying from a gentleman, Louis Schwartzberg. He did the movie Fantastic Fungi, as well as a lot of other really beautiful cinematography. And one of the quotes that he said when he was at Esalen, was, "We protect what we love." And that really hit a chord of resonance. It's like when a child is born, or when you really care about your home or your land, you protect it. And there's a way that impulse has been destructive, where people would come in and colonize an area, and it's like, this is my place, and they protect it. But then there's a way to do that from a place of real care and love. And when we look at this beautiful planet that we have, my deepest desire is to protect her, to care for this place, and to be whatever spark of consciousness I can be that helps other people to do the same. And so that's why a lot of my work is just reminding people of our interconnection with nature, and stewarding an opportunity for them to fall back in love with this beautiful planet. And so, that's as far as like turning a failure or turning a challenge into an opportunity. It's like my individual failures in manifesting the world around me that I want to see for myself and my children and others is an opportunity to bring greater care to my life, and to build a village like what we're building with Holos, and to remind people that we're all connected.
And this brings me to the next question. So that's helping the planet, living something that, or living the place, living here, this world better than you found it. What's your formula for a good living today?
Oh, it's like so basic. The formula is, what are we doing every day? We're breathing. That's a good first step. And so take care of the air, like be conscious. Ideally move into transportation modes that are not filling our air with carbon dioxide or other chemicals. What else are we doing every day? We're eating. Pay attention to where food comes from. Do you know your farmers? Is your food coming from a place that is organic and a place that is regenerating the soil? Are you conscious of each bite you take, and what the nutrients are, or what your body's telling you? And then water. Where is your water coming from? Is it a local spring? Is it coming from the earth? Is it highly processed? And being aware of our water. And then our shelter. Where does our shelter come from? What mining took place for the metal in the buildings that we are in? Where was the wood harvested? Where was the stone coming from? What are the implications of all of those steps along the way that aggregated together to be our home and our shelter? And then community. Who do we surround ourselves with? And what are the practices that we cultivate together? What are the rituals, the ceremonies? What are the cultural norms that support our well-being? In that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose. So, it's like very basic constituents of what it is to live a good life. It's every step, and then seeing how that step or that bite of food is connected to a much larger web, and just cultivating that awareness, cultivating that practice of conscious eating, conscious living, conscious breathing. I think that is really the key thing. And then even more basic is, we have this body, which is a temple. How are we tending to this temple? And a temple is a place where you go to pray, you go to commune with the divine, with the universe. And so tending to this temple in a way where it's clean and it's healthy, and that we exercise, and we have all of those other components. And then to distill it down even more, this is something that I really practiced at Burning Man, and then elsewhere in my life. And it's actually what led me to the waterfalls in Mexico that I mentioned at the very beginning. If one attunes, when I attune to my body, it's constantly offering me feedback about what I'm doing in my day-to-day life, and whether it's in resonance and harmony with my body. And our body is made up of the earth and the water and the fire and the air. And so when we truly tune to our bodies, then their health is directly related to the health of the world around us. So yeah, I think if you needed to distill it down, it's really listen to your body and pay attention.
And three last questions to end to end the interview and the conversation. What best and worst Yeah, worst and best advice ever received and given?
Probably the best advice when I mentioned I hitchhiked from Alaska to Mexico when I was 18. My mom gave me this little book, and she had written some little quotes in it, and it became my place that I held a lot of quotes. And something so simple. She just wrote, "Follow your dreams," and that's what I've been doing. And I think that's good advice. We're in the process of dreaming a new dream. Our human world has been formed by the aggregate dreams of all those that came before us and our own dreams. And we need new dreams. We need new dreams that are full of life and reciprocity with the living world. So that's probably the best advice I've ever been given, which was by my mom. Oh, the worst advice. Let's see, what is the worst advice? Well, there's this idea of perfection, and whether it was given as advice or just something that I was kind of ingrained with from a young age, it was like this idea of needing to be perfect or needing to create things that are perfect. And we're always in a dance with chaos. And so while perfection may be a very beautiful ideal, um, it's it's not it's not the destination. The destination is the journey. It's about enjoying that path towards towards, I don't even want to call it perfection, but refinement, that journey of refinement. And so I think the worst advice is like that cultural and kind of universal desire for perfection, because it has created so much self-judgment in my journey towards myself and towards others. And yeah, so that would be what I would say.
So, who would you recommend me to interview next?
Oh, that's another great question. Who's a real disruptor? A dear brother of mine, Ramayan. I was just with him last night, and I just really appreciate his wisdom and the way that he is also tending to community and space. And he's really looking at things from a larger systems perspective. Ramayan Ananda, such a beautiful man.
What's the name? Sorry?
Ramayan Ananda. And I'll send you his information.
I would love to. Thank you so much. And last but not least, if you were about to launch a billboard on Madison Square Garden with a message headline for everyone, and with the reach and notoriety of the message, what would you put in this billboard?
Would you say that one more time?
Yes. You have a chance to advertise yourself in a billboard on the Madison Square Garden, or Madison Square Garden, or Madison Square Garden, and you were like, I was thinking another weird place, but I think this one is better. If you have a chance to advertise yourself and write a headline, so what would be that message or headline in the billboard?
Oh, wow. Well, the first image that came to mind was there's a photo called Earthrise, and it's a picture taken from the moon of the Earth rising over the moon. And just so simple. It would just say, "We are all one," and it would be a picture of the Earth rising above the moon. Just a reminder that all of our human experiences are here connected on one planet.
Ian, where people can find you in the internet, or what's the best way to? Know more
Instagram
about
is good.
it.
Ian Michael Hébert, and then Holos.global is another Instagram. And I have websites at both of those as well, ianmichaelhebert.com and Holos.global.
Anything else you want to add, Ayan?
I'm just really grateful for the provocative questions, and look forward to hearing from anyone that is interested in continuing the dialogue, or any other opportunities that we can speak in this like very real way and create a world that makes more sense. And so I'm really grateful for the premise of this podcast, of disrupting everything. And my high school quote was question everything, and I've moved into more of a place of wonderment at this point than questioning. Questioning has this energy of a little bit of being aggressive, and I've softened that. But the opportunity that we have right now with this moment where so many global systems are changing and we're really being tested, it's such an opportunity to rebuild. So the disruption is already happening everywhere, and then comes creation. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak about what we're creating here in Costa Rica and elsewhere in the world, and just an opportunity to get to know you better.
Ayan, I have to say it's been a real pleasure and honor. Thanks for making a ruckus. Thanks for building your dreams more than following your dreams. Building it. It takes courage. It takes sacrifice. We pay a price. Everything has a price, but it's inspiring to know about disruptors and passionate and really real people with this level of integrity and dignity and virtue like you. So I've been personally inspired by this conversation, this interview, and looking forward to know the feedback, looking forward to the feedback of the community, looking forward to explore more possibilities about the projects we were talking about before the interview. And thanks for being in this podcast, and thanks for doing the work that matters, and keep doing that ruckus maker work.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano.
Gracias a ti, hermano. Well, you had Esalen Michael Hébert on this wondering anything and making it real for creating a better world. That's what disruption means, not interrupting, interrupting common and usual and habitual patterns to create new ones that change and move the world. If that moves, shakens the structures of what we built until now, we are saved. Because if you don't disrupt yourself and your surrounding, you will be disrupted, and this, believe me, will be more painful. So take action. Take one learning from Ayan. Take one lesson, one takeaway, whatever you want to take, but take one thing that you can put into action. Take action now, because that is what all is about. Share it with one person, leave a comment in your favorite platform, and make sure you follow Ayan's work, because it's worth following and worth sharing and worth celebrating it. We are blessed to have you. Thanks, Ayan, and thank you for listening Disrupt Everything podcast series. You've been disrupted.
Esto ha sido Disrupt Everything by Isla García. Encuentra el riesgo antes de que el riesgo te encuentre a ti.